we're going to talk about how I would set up a low poundage, short draw length shooter to make them as successful as possible in the woods. I'll show you the broadhead selection, I'll show you arrow selection, and then I want to compare what their bow would look like versus a average shooter, the 28-inch 70-pound shooter. And I'm going to compare speed there, I want to compare energy calculations, arrow weight. That way you can tell and I can kind of back up why I'm making the selections I'm making. Alright, so I've got a Dragon X8 here. I've got it set at a 24-inch draw, and I'm going to use my scale here real quick to make sure it's at 40 pounds. Okay. I'm showing 41.02, so close enough. That's going to represent our small frame shooter bow. And then I have my bow back here that's set at 29 inches at 70 pounds. That's going to represent our large frame shooter bow. Now for the speed comparison, I'm using a Victory VAP. It's a micro diameter arrow. It's 429 grains. You'll see that right here on the scale. And I'm going to shoot it out of both bows and just compare speeds apples to apples. Now the nice thing is these are the same exact bow. They're both Sanlita Dragon X8s. The only difference is one is set at 29 at 70 and the other one is set at 24 at 41. Now obviously this is not going to be an even up comparison because you're not going to shoot this length of arrow out of that short of a draw length of a bow. So what I'll do after I get my speeds is I will calculate the average, or what I would say the normal, which is an inch over draw length. That's where I like to start all my small frame or new shooters. So I'll calculate this arrow weight at an inch over draw length, and then I can use that calculation to get a roundabout of the speed. So let's go ahead and do that speed comparison. So from the average shooter's bow, you saw 250 feet a second. From the small frame shooter bow, we saw 141. That's a pretty big discrepancy, 110 feet a second. But like I said before, that doesn't tell the whole story because you're not gonna shoot this length of arrow from the smaller frame shooter's bow. So to remedy that, what I did is subtract 3.5 inches of carbon from this right here. And the reason I did that is because I want an inch over draw length. So this will be a 25-inch carbon to carbon arrow in this scenario. And then I multiplied that by the grain weight per inch of this arrow, which is 8.7, and it gave me the number 30.45. So basically I'm subtracting 30.45 grains of weight from this arrow, which would put it at a 399 grain arrow. Now, a couple things that are also going to add to this is a 300 spine arrow, and you may not have your small frame shooter shooting 300 spines, so they may have a lighter arrow overall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract, we'll say 45 grains total from this arrow weight, which is going to put me right around 384 for total arrow weight, which is a really good arrow weight for that bow setup. And then I'm going to give you a rough guesstimate about the increase in speed, and I would say you're probably going to see about a 30 to 35 feet per second increase in speed, maybe a little less, we'll say 30. That's going to get you to 171 feet a second, which is what we're going to use for our number for the small frame shooter bow. And that is about average from what I've seen from other small frame setups I've set up. I mean, it's right around recurve numbers. That's usually where I see it and where I put it. So now let's use that number to do some energy calculations. All right, so I punched 388 grains and 171 feet a second into this momentum and kinetic energy calculator. And I found 25.19 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, which is not important, and 0.295 slugs of momentum, which is important. So let's go ahead and cover arrow selection really quick. It's not a big deal and it shouldn't take very long. Basically, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, if you're looking to build them a serious hunting setup and make them as successful as possible, you're going to want to avoid standard diameter arrows and go with at least small diameter 204, but I recommend micros. You're looking to get every little bit of penetration as you can out of this setup, and a micro diameter arrow is going to help with that. I've had really good luck with the Victory VAPs. Matter of fact, I've had really good luck with every Victory I've ever used, so I do really recommend them. But any bow company, a Black Eagle, Easton, Gold Tip, any of those guys are going to make a micro diameter arrow that's going to work fine. Just kind of go with whatever you're comfortable with. Now on each of those websites you can get on and find a spine chart, and you can either do one of two options. You can select the proper spine for their bow setup with the poundage and the draw length, or you can go 300 spine. If I were to cut this 300 spine arrow down, it would set up and tune perfectly fine out of this bow because it's such a stiff shaft. And an advantage of going with a 300 spine, it does give them a little bit heavier arrow. Not anything insane. I'm not gonna tell you to build a 600 grain arrow for them, but that little bit heavier arrow can aid in momentum and penetration, and it's definitely something you should consider. Not to mention that 300 spine arrow, if they're going to keep increasing their poundage, but their draw length's not going to increase for a while, that 300 spine arrow is going to continue to be good for quite a while before it's not anymore. So these arrows could potentially last them a lot longer, especially if you're cutting in an inch long to begin with. I have one category option for broadheads for the small frame shooter, and that's a cut on contact fixed blade broadhead. But there are two sides of the spectrum you can go. You can build them that 600 grain arrow I was talking about earlier and go super heavy and get a broadhead that penetrates absolutely amazing, like this meathead. Realistically, this is the ideal broadhead profile for a small frame shooter because it's got a 3-to-1, which means 3 inches long by 1 inch wide ratio, which penetrates the best. And the reason it does that is because it's a very gradual increase in the cutting diameter, and it's the same for the ferrule in this direction. It's a very gradual increase that really aids in penetration. Downside, this is a 265 grain broadhead. You don't really have a choice but to build a super heavy arrow if you go with something like this. Even a grizzly, which is similar, doesn't quite have that 3-to-1 ratio, but this is a 200 grain broadhead. So you're going to have to build a heavier arrow setup if you go this route. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does definitely limit range because of the trajectory of the arrow. So this is a 20-yard at the absolute max setup. Now, if you're hunting a situation where that's fine, I'm not gonna tell you not to do it because these options are gonna penetrate fantastically. But if you're having to shoot further, I don't think I would build that heavy of an arrow setup. If you're looking to go 100 grain, I've got a few options here. One that really, right off the top of my head, I think would be great is a Wasp sharpshooter. I have a broadhead test coming out on these here soon. And this is a fantastic broadhead. It's small profile, it's a 1 inch cutting diameter. It does have bleeders, so you're going to get a little bit better cutting diameter overall, but it's still going to penetrate well and hold up. Another option is going to be a lesser known company, but still a great broadhead. I also have a broadhead review of these coming up. The Simmons Mako. And again, cut on contact tip, bleeder blades, stout broadhead. It's going to penetrate well. And the last option I'm going to show you is from a company who also I don't feel like gets enough attention, and that is a Flichter, and it's the K2 Fixed. Now I'm going to tell you right off the bat, this would be, of the 3 options I showed you, this would be my last option, but it's still a viable option. It is a cut on contact broadhead as well. It has a small 1 1/8 inch cutting diameter with bleeders. The thing I don't like is those bleeders have that shoulder, and because it's only a little, but it's still abrupt before it starts cutting, and that's going to hurt your penetration. And again, we're trying to ink out every little bit of penetration in this setup. So these are still viable, will still definitely work, but they're not my preferred option of the 3 I've showed you. Now real quick, I just want to talk about a couple broadheads or types of broadheads I would avoid. Absolutely no mechanical broadheads. You don't want anything that's going to eat up energy from your arrow setup. I would avoid any large cut or really steep cutting. So if it's a fixed blade but it's got a profile like this, I would avoid it. You're going to want more of a triangular pointed profile. Just again, we want aiding in penetration, not anything that's going to eat up penetration. And a broadhead like this more chops than it slices and cuts. You want that cut. Anything that is, you know, 3 blade, I would honestly avoid 3 and 4 blades. I would stick to 2 blades or 2 blades with bleeders. Again, you're looking at less surface area, you're looking at less friction, we're looking at better overall penetration. And I don't know if you figured it out, but the name of game with this setup is penetration, penetration, penetration. You know, if you go with the lighter arrow setup, I would be okay extending that range 25, 30 yards if your small frame shooter can competently shoot that. You're going to have good arrow flight, you're not going to have a super, super steep trajectory, and it should be enough, provided they hit where they need to definitely kill an animal.